Hey, everybody. Welcome again to HR Ignite Summit 2023. We're so excited to have with us our two next guests. Felice Ekelman is a principal in New York City, New York, office of Jackson Lewis PC, and a former member of the firm's board of directors. She has in-depth legal knowledge of workplace law issues with expertise ranging from compliance and equal employment opportunity laws, wage and hour laws, and laws governing relationship between unions and employers. Felice is well known for her litigation skills. I'd like to see that in action. And she's also a trusted advisor and works with businesses to develop sound policies and to train and support leaders. Executive coach and management consultant, Dr. Julie Kantor, combines 20 plus years of experience, with business, graduate education, and psychological principles to facilitate growth for individuals, teams, and organizations all over the world. She is the founder of JP Kantor Consulting, a corporate consulting firm that works with clients across many industries, including media entertainment companies, professional service firms, financial service organizations, and so much more. Julie appreciates the complexity of the work environment and knows what it takes for people to change. She builds on an individual's strengths to develop their emotional intelligence as a tool to increase their leadership effectiveness. She helps take people and organizations to higher levels as she customizes all work to each unique culture, which is such a skill set, Julie, in 25 plus years. And for both of you, they just came out with a book this year called, and you got, Thrive with a Hybrid Workplace.
I have it.
Released March 3rd of this year too. That's amazing.
There it is.
I love the cover too, by the way. I love how simple it is. It really is catchy. But what I love is that this amazing book that you deliver expert guidance to maximize growth and minimize risk in your hybrid workplace, which a lot of individuals have. It could be a risky business, essentially, the hybrid workplace. With hybrid work, leaders must ensure that employees are engaged, remote work is productive, and teams are collaborating with all legal guidelines. This book walks you through the step-by-step process. If you guys haven't yet, go out and get it. Go out and get it. Every organization should have one because hybrid is not going away anytime soon. In fact, COVID, it's interesting that it came kind of after COVID, but I anticipate you guys have been working around and working with this for years before the pandemic hit and everybody was scrambling to work in hybrid. So I'd love to hear more about that. Thank you again, lady. Thank you so much for coming today. We're very excited to have you here and to learn more about what we can do in our businesses and in our roles to make this a great part of our culture and what we can do to offer our people.
Thank you for that introduction.
Yes. Appreciate it. Thank you. All right. Hybrid workplace. So we all hear about it, we talk about it, but I would love to have you introduce the core principles of thriving in a hybrid work environment, as you've outlined in your book.
So I'll take this. This is Felice. I'll start the conversation, and I'm sure Julie will add on. So let's talk about what is hybrid work first, because we want to make sure that everyone is on the same page. So hybrid work refers to a system where folks work a mixture of in an office and away from an office. And that could involve a team where some employees are remote and others work in an office. It could involve a team where some employees are remote, some work in an office all the time, and others work in an office part of the time. The real change that we've seen post-pandemic is the much broader application of hybrid work to mean that most office employees in an organization would have the ability to work in an office some of the time, but not all of the time. And that is what's commonly referred to, I think, today when business leaders talk about hybrid work. Julie, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of sort of the core principles, once you build on what Felice was describing in terms of potential models for it. One of the core principles that we talked about the book is the concept of intentionality. And everybody knows what the word intentional means, but intentionality in the case of hybrid work that we found is leaders have to think about things that they didn't used to have to think about. They need to be mindful about things such as connecting with their employees. When everybody was in the office 100% of the time, I didn't have to think about whether or not I'd see or connect with my employees. They were just around. I could walk around. And I think one of the other pieces that Felice and I are finding with leaders we're working with is we both had jobs in terms of counseling senior level leaders before COVID. And we had a job before them, meaning that they needed help learning the skills of leadership. And now, in terms of a core principle, is helping leaders realize that they can't use the previous mode of functioning and leading, that they need new skills, which is why, and we'll probably hit this theme in many times, is the concept of training, because it's having leaders learn new skills. And it's also a shift of orientation. And I think we'll get into that some more as we talk about the different ways that hybrid is emerging. It's changing employees' demands. The market is changing. All of these things are going to be impacting the organization.
And I think the rise of hybrid work post-pandemic was first viewed as a compromise. So remember, many leaders were trying to get employees back to the office. Everyone wanted to go back to the way it was before March of 2020. And so hybrid was viewed as like the first step in enticing people back to the work. We'll come back to the office just 2 days a week or every other week, or just for these meetings. And then, when leaders were not always winning this compromise battle, because we've read over the last couple of years about a lot of trials and tribulations business leaders have had trying to convince employees to come back. Leaders, I think, are now recognizing that hybrid is a goal in and of itself and not a compromise position, but a position you want to be in. And that, I think, is changing the nature of the approach and changing a lot of the advice that we've been giving to business leaders over the past few months, as hybrid is now viewed as a more desirable part of an employee benefits program.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen an evolution, as Felice was saying, in terms of getting people back to the office. That was initially what the sense was. And quite honestly, when we got out of COVID, it was an employee market. And so a lot of employees were just saying, sorry, I like my pajamas. I'm not coming back so fast. And as the economy has been shifting, the balance is shifting. I mean, it even came out today in HR magazine, the cover, it's called The Great Compromise. Employers and workers are meeting in the middle of a return to office. I mean, it's literally the cover of HR magazine. So, we are settling into some patterns. Felice and I have been talking for quite a while that and coaching our clients that, you need to try something. And if it doesn't work, you need to potentially change it. We've been getting a little bit more experience in our research in terms of where the pitfalls are. And one of the pitfalls is the policies that they're using and how they're creating them.
I love that you talk. I feel like there's this pendulum that's swaying and it's starting to come back, but there's this thing that's born out of necessity that's now becoming this coveted, like, oh, this is what we want to have. And I've seen that shift a lot just with some of these really great skills, things that help propel businesses to be the next best thing. But it can be hard if you were talking about leadership and developing leaders that are trying to learn basic leadership skills, and then all of a sudden getting uprooted and saying, oh, we're going to shake it up, and now you have to add hybrid into that. That has to
Well,
be
I think that, it's interesting. I think the first step is for business leaders to acknowledge that hybrid work is a great scheme. Because once they acknowledge that, and it's not the fallback compromise I just discussed, once they acknowledge that, they can better empower leaders to really understand the value. And this practice of allowing folks the opportunity to work from home some of the time can really support the development of human capital. So we've been, hearing about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and ESG, and all of these goals towards greater workplace participation by individuals who might not otherwise be able to work or work successfully are important to organizations. And hybrid work is now increasingly recognized as a way to enhance a DEI program, because when you allow for flexibility, you allow for more people to participate in the workplace who might not otherwise. I mean, caregivers who tend to be women is the number one target for, a hybrid policy. But all of us tend to enjoy not having the stress of coming to work every day. And there are stresses, Julie will explain, associated with not having the same routine every day, but at the same time, the stress of having to get to work, prepare for work, losing time in the commute, the money associated with that, for a caregiver racing out in the morning in order to get to work on time and then running back at the end of the day to get home on time. I mean, this not having that stress every day is really an important part of human capital investment. And I think employers will be able to recruit and retain talent at another level when they allow for flexible work arrangements such as hybrid work.
Thank you. You briefly touched on the evolution. I would love to dive a little bit deeper into pre-pandemic. What was that looking like, this all at home, and now this hybrid? What have you guys seen in that evolution?
Well, pre-pandemic, people were usually either remote or in the office.
I think you might have meant that the other way around. Pre-pandemic, it was people were in the office. There was a small percentage that was 100% remote. And then we went to a period of lockdown where there was basically nobody in the office. And if you live in places like New York City, where Felice and I are, you really felt, because there was nobody on the street. If you live in more rural areas, they were not feeling the change as much as they were in cities. But that was the evolution. Then we had some sense of people going back and forth, and now it's becoming norm. And just sort of a sort of concrete example of what we've seen with our clients, and one of the things we've been advising them about in the transition of when we were going from lockdown to people returning, the language was how many days people are going to have to come to the office. So just even stating that in that language, it's already a punishment. It's already saying people don't want to come in. It's already, pitting employer-employee apart. And it's very simple, but one of the things we've been advising our clients is normalize it. Like Felice said, this is something which is a normal part of business. It's not just a perk. And so you just have to say, like, we're talking about your in-office days and work from home days, or remote days, because people may be working at the beach. And if you can get your work done at the beach, like, that's okay. But sort of shifting and normalizing it, I think, is a real piece of where Felice and I have been trying to advise our clients. It's not a punishment to come into the office. It is just part of your job. And yes, as employers, there are things that they need to work on and changing how they're leading. But it's creating it as a norm as opposed to an exception or a punishment. I think the other piece too that we've seen in terms of this evolution of the biggest complaint most people talk about is the commute. it's, once they sort of do it and it's like, wow, I actually like being back in the office. But in certain places where people are having super commutes of 2 hours, that becomes the big problem. You have caretakers, you have people who want to get home for kids' activities or seeing their partner. It's a commute issue. And again, we see talking in terms about norm, making that, creating it as a norm.
Thank you. What are some top strategies small business leaders and HR leaders can employ to not just navigate, but to lead in the hybrid era?
So, I think employers who ask leaders to be responsible for hybrid teams have to really stop and make sure that those leaders know how to do that. And it's more than just checking to see if people are showing up on the days they're supposed to show up. It's about making the time in the office meaningful so that people are not commuting only to sit in front of a computer and have online, video meetings all day long. It's making sure that there are interactive and collaborative opportunities. The second thing is, and I know Julie can talk more about that, the second thing is leaders have to know how to evaluate staff to make sure that they are fairly reviewing their work. And that may require a new skill set when they don't see their staff in the office every single day. And then the third big issue that I talk to clients about is this possibility of what we call proximity bias. And proximity bias is a phenomenon when a leader favors those who are around more, who are proximate. And so that is a very easy trap for leaders to fall into, to basically hand out key assignments, work with more closely, become more allied with employees who are around more, physically present. And it takes more work, perhaps, to connect with folks who are remote more often, but it would be unfair to not give those employees the same opportunities. And so leaders need to be trained to handle these issues as well as many others.
Yeah, proximity bias is probably one of the best examples that Felice and I bring in terms of, which is one of the themes of the book, when you said earlier about minimizing risk and maximizing growth. We talked about when the book was born, and one of the ways it was Felice and I have talked, we've known each other for decades. And, she sort of summed up sort of her career. I spent my career helping clients minimize risk. And I've said, I've spent my career helping clients grow. So and proximity bias is probably the one place where we can help clients appreciate the two sides. So Felice just shared with you the issue in terms of equity of employers and turning down to the individual leaders of how they are providing fair opportunities. The reality is, if the three of us are a team and Felice and I are in the office, let's talk about Felice sitting, on one of her negotiations, and she wants to, help coach and develop a junior person. Chances are she's not going to call somebody, set up a Zoom meeting when in fact it's a live meeting, or even a Zoom meeting and then sending out another invite to somebody who's a junior attorney. She's going to walk down the hall and find the person who's near her to join the meeting. And, that's also just a reality. And so we need to help leaders appreciate what that means. And to some degree, it's helping them learn how they may need to help employees who are resistant to coming in. One of my big points is about the need for interpersonal glue and that connection. And we've certainly seen employers coping with employees who just won't want to come in. And this is especially true for younger folks. I know when we've done interviews and and it's with teams themselves and groups and they're generally pretty young, sort of early employees, who are just out of college. And they sort of don't get why you need to have your camera on, and show up, let alone coming into the office. And so helping leaders learn how, they didn't used to have to coach somebody to come into the office 5 days a week because everybody came into the office 5 days a week. Now that we're seeing this evolution, it's something that employers have to be facing and dealing with. But again, it's just a really good example of sort of employers needing to consider legal ramifications versus the reality of running their businesses.
Thank you for that. A lot of times I'll hear leaders say, well, is it going to get me in trouble all the time? But there has to be a really good balance with what actually allows you to run your business, because your business is providing jobs and services. Love that. Thank you. You talked a lot about challenges as well already, and how they can be addressed. I would love to know, from a sustainability perspective, how can they ensure that their company culture remains robust and cohesive when employees are working in varied environments, just long term?
I think it's all about intentionality. You can't just assume that folks will get to know one another when they're not working together in the same place all the time, which is why leaders have to make sure that they understand the importance of making time in the office meaningful. And so you can't assume that's going to happen. It really has to be planned. So, the hybrid arrangement, it can be magical because, it gives people time to work quietly at home some days a week. And yet it also provides for all those water cooler moments that, we've been hearing about people missing. A lot of people don't like being home all the time because it's isolating and because they do miss out on developing personal relations with colleagues. And so the hybrid approach can do it all, basically. And leaders are starting to realize that. But again, you're not going to force people to come to an office on a certain number of days a week if there's no reason for them to be together. So, making it meaningful is going to really support, again, human capital and allow for greater productivity and collaboration, as well as loyalty to an organization and the development of culture. But it takes a little bit more work.
Yeah, and I think the piece in terms of, what Felice was talking in terms of about being purposeful, one of the shifts that we've had with clients coming to us in terms of creating a policy, and the initial piece we saw about the policies were, is it 2 days a week in the office? Is it 3 days? Is it an 8-day month? And the commodity of the conversation for the policy was based on the number of days in the office. And I have come to say that a policy which is merely the days that you're in the office is just a silly policy, because as Felice was saying, it has to be purposeful. The additional work for leaders now is they have to think about that, and they have to help teach their employees that the days you're on working at home, these are the kinds of activities. And this boils down to one-on-one conversations in terms of coaching an individual and helping them develop, as well as with the team. As in contrast, on the the days in the office, think about what are the activities that are best brought in, because we both have certainly seen plenty of people who have come either to an office and spend their day on on the computer, or worse, they come to the office and there's nobody else there. So it's really something that they need to be thinking about. I think the other piece that we have now is this concept of developing culture needs to be thought about, and it's different. And so, it may be for people who are on a meeting, of a virtual meeting, is trying to add in things and normative, make it a norm, that the first 10 minutes, sort of like we did in this meeting, right? We sort of talked about, I was on vacation, and we shared where else we've been on vacation, having leaders make that the norm. And so before you start a 60-minute meeting, it's sort of standard practice that the first 10 minutes is just shooting the breeze about what restaurant you went to, or, how's, the stuff with the family or your kids or whatnot, because that glue is important in terms of building the team.
The other thing is having a hybrid policy says that the employer cares about and respects employees, you know, time management and work-life balance, and recognizes that work is stressful, and removing one little stressor, commuting every single day, can make work much more enjoyable for many people. And I think employers would be well served to mind that. Okay, it is an advantage to offer to employees this flexibility. I mean, if folks want to come to an office every day, they can come to an office every day, unless, of course, there are space issues. But you know, in terms of sustainability, reducing the stress of coming to the office every day and allowing for a bit more work-life balance, that is part of the, you know, the investment in human capital that organizations that embrace hybrid work should be messaging better.
I love that. We hear a lot about burnout. People are getting burnout. There was that great resignation that happened. How can making this part of the culture, what have you guys seen in your experience with burnout? Have you seen better retention, especially in high stress
Julie,
jobs?
I'll let you take this one.
Yeah, I mean, first, just a note about the great retention. I contend one of the reasons the great retention took place was that there was no culture and there's no connection. You know, the mere walking into an office creates a connection with the company. During the lockdown, if I didn't like my job, I could send a text, a 2-word text to my boss. I didn't have to look him or her in the face, and just said I quit. And so it was much easier, this lack of connection, which is why we talk so much about the connection and the need for that. I think the other piece of the burnout is when, you know, Felice has mentioned in many different ways, is respect and acknowledgement of work-life balance. And when people have that, there's a greater sense of respect. I mean, you know, I've been working a long time, and I can remember, and I have my own business, so there were times I could work from home in different ways. And there were times where I was pretending I was in an office because, you know, there are many clients who, like, they didn't buy the fact that anybody should be working. And so I, you know, needed to pretend that I was calling from an office as opposed to my home. And what's nice is that's become the norm, and that it's not unexpected. The one piece I would say, though, again, falling on the leaders in terms of setting standards, is when you're working at home, you're still working. And I've had leaders say, because they're sort of walking on tiptoes, well, you know, I'm not so sure about this hybrid policy because they're not really returning my emails on a work from home day. I'm like, sorry to be the bad guy here, but that's just doing your job. You know, I mean, it's not unreasonable to expect an employee to do their job. And so it's also stepping up in terms of bosses needing to work on performance management in ways they didn't used to have to do.
Yeah, but new performance management skills are necessary. And one of the things, and I can acknowledge Julie wrote this part of the book, one of the things that she talks about is making sure that folks who are on the same team have an agreement about how they're going to communicate when they're not all in the same place at the same time. And I learned a lot from your presentation on that in the book, Julie, where you discussed, you know, email versus Slack versus a phone call. And I think you're right. I think it's important for leaders to make it clear to their reports, you know, how they should be communicating and when.
What has that done? What has that done for the trust? What have you seen for the people that are doing it well? So you guys are coaching a lot of organizational leaders. Some have been working on their leadership skills for years. They already have a really good base. They're doing things well and they're accepting it. What are you seeing that, how are they transitioning, or what are you seeing as bringing kind of those top leaders to the surface?
Well, one of the ways you can see it is what happens in the retention of their teams. You know, that leaders who have got a lot of turnover in their teams, there's something going on, that they're not connecting people, they're not managing people. Subpar performers are staying when talented people are leaving. That's one of the best ways you can determine it. But it's, if a leader accepts the basic premise of, I need to connect with my employee. These are people who are having regular one-on-ones, right? They're having regular meetings, they're talking with them, they're invested in, you know, growing their leaders. I mean, you know, Felice can talk about junior people who she's growing and she's committed to in terms of the health of her organization. And if she didn't do that, there would be no future. The organization would not, you know, continue to grow. And so to some degree, you know, especially, you know, Felice can talk more in terms of just looking at the people that you are counseling and coaching and mentoring. Do you have those people? Those people stay. If you look at the data and the research now, when people talk what matters to them in applying for jobs, personal development is in the top probably 3.
And it's interesting because, Julie, you pointed out that retention is an important data point. I think another important data point is promotions. Are employees who are hybrid being given the same promotional opportunities? Do they know about promotions? Are they applying? Are they successful? And one of the things you want to make sure is that those opportunities are made available to everyone, regardless of, you know, whether they're availing themselves of the hybrid arrangement or not. But good managers will make sure that their team knows about promotional opportunities and seek them out when appropriate. So that's a second data point I would look at.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we talk a lot about training. The other thing that managers need to train their employees is connecting the dots for them, in terms of, if you're at home and you have your camera off all the time, it's not going to put you in a position where you're going to be up for getting promoted, even if you know about the jobs. And so it's, the onus is on the manager. Like, you hope all employees are self-motivated and get it, but it is on the managers to also educate employees about what they need to do and why it matters. And, you know, we've both been in, you know, we work helping leaders, the individuals. We've also helped with their teams. Leaders like pulling us in to help deliver messages they don't like to deliver. Felice and I have jobs, but help to reinforce and teach them the importance of coming into work and being present, whether you're on video or coming into the office.
That authenticity. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that there are a number of organizations that are dusting off their or reassessing their hybrid work policies that may have been developed initially as part of this great compromise to get people back to the office. And now's a good time to do that, because I think now is the time for organizations to better assess which positions can work on a hybrid basis. I mean, that determination may not have been done carefully at first. The other thing is, it's not so much the number of days, but having a social pact with your team that when there's an in-person meeting, everybody shows up, because it's respectful and meaningful to do that. You know, 90% of the folks are not present, and then 2 people are remote, unless, you know, there's a reason that they need to be remote. It's better when everyone is there together on those days. And so I think, you know, honing the policies to make sure also that everyone who is eligible to work in an office only some of the time is availing themselves of this opportunity. Sort of like, you know, I'm afraid of proximity bias, so I'm always going to show up, or my boss, you know, gives hybrid work lip service. Or, you know, a recruiter says, yes, we have hybrid work, but really, if you want to get ahead, show up every day. You know, there needs to be consistent messaging and assessment of the communications and the effectiveness of the communications, as well as a review of the policy is a good thing to do, because if this is an offered benefit, it needs to be utilized consistently and fairly.
Yeah, and I think the piece in terms of developing the policy that we find our clients facing is at what level are the decisions made? Is it are they make an organizational wide decision? Everybody's in Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday, or 3 days a week, whatever the policy is. And as Felice was just noting, it doesn't necessarily work. And so, we've been working with our clients to help them figure out at what level they want some standards and at what level they're empowering the individual managers to figure out what works for their team. And again, there's, and then this is where sort of Felice maybe could, called, because, leader 1 and leader 2 are in the same department, but leader 1 is saying, we've got 2 days in the office and the rest you can do what you want. And the other is saying you have to come in Monday through Thursday, and not any consideration about what they're doing. And so this is where this is again where the minimizing risk is. So if you give the opportunity to everybody, there's still got to be some parity in terms of fairness.
Great, thank you. I love, you're talking a lot about I hear company values. It's not really spelled out, but really understanding what are the values of the company? How does this hybrid work support those values? But what I also love is it's not an excuse to not hold people accountable. I want to say, and I think sometimes I've heard people I've worked with is same thing. I was in corporate for 20 years. So as you show up, if you don't show up, you don't get the promotions, right? Like that was the mentality for years. And we've kind of shifted into this, that there's so much more you can do with it. And I just lost my train of thought. It went right out the window there. Woo!
I think, again, I think the evolution of hybrid work is such that for many employers in the United States, there's no going back to 5 days a week. And that this is a benefit that seems like it's easy to offer because it doesn't have a cost necessarily, but it's only going to work as a investment in human capital and wellness and promoting better opportunities for caregivers and women if it's used in the proper way. And, if it's embraced as part of a DEI movement, and it can really make a difference and say a lot about what an organization stands for. But again, intentionality, that word keeps coming up. It's just not going to do this on its own. Leaders have to make sure that they're communicating consistently about it and that everyone understands what's expected under the policy. So, whether it's policy drafting for the first time, reviewing it, or assessing its effectiveness, it's an important undertaking, and certainly HR professionals should be leading this undertaking, but they can't do it without the imprimatur of management, of leadership.
Yeah, I mean, I think Felice, used the term in terms of organizations figuring out what they stand for. And this is something that HR is probably going to need to be the leader on. What are their values? And one of the things we talk about in the book is the need to help, having some value proposition to become an, employer of choice. But then you can't just have words, you need to live it. So one of the simple example is a value proposition which every recruiter says to their, it's like they believe in work-life balance, and then they have leaders who email their staff 24/7. And so this usually falls on HR to drive the bus on this one, to help the company clarify their mission, clarify their values, and then most significantly, how are those values going to show up and live with them. And that's one of the things we talk about this book of what are the concrete ways that your values live. Like if you value creativity, how is that going to show up? Is that something like you literally have, there are organizations that they mandate teams, keep huddles open, for 2 hours in the middle of the day because they want to make it easy for people to connect. So just thinking of these concrete ways to make these, like Felice was saying, what do they stand for? How are they going to live it?
And it's all in the book. Thrive with a Hybrid Workplace. It really is step-by-step guidance. And at the end of every chapter, we we provide concrete tips and steps and agendas and things to do. And, you know, it's a resource guide in the sense that you can flip through it and look at different chapters, whether or not you want to focus on communications, whether you want to focus on training or drafting a policy. So we're excited that we can help organizations figure this hybrid thing out. And we're thrilled that hybrid work has really caught on and has become, you know, a part of the conversation, and continues to be a part of the conversation even long after, knock wood, the pandemic is over.
Thank you. Ladies, thank you so much. What parting words do you have for any business owner? Well, one, buy the book. So if you guys haven't yet heard that message, I have read leadership books, and one of the things that I love what you guys have done is not only is it give you, it's a resource guide, right? You don't just read it and you put it on your shelf and you walk away, but it's a resource that you can continue to use. As a leader, you continue to become frontline individuals that are just helping this movement go. And so I'd love to know, the future of work is coming. It will continue to change and adapt. How do you see, and what advice do you have for the leaders and HR managers when it comes to hybrid workplace?
Don't be afraid of it.
Yeah, I think that, you know, and this actually dates back to my dissertation, which is long ago that I'd like to say.
Last week, Julie.
Right, it was last week I finished. It was great. But one of the things I talked about there was the concept of the myth of separate worlds. I think we've left that gone. And one of the things in terms of being, you know, work and personal life. And I think one of the things that's been beautiful is that people don't have to pretend they're in the office when they're on a phone call. And so, you know, I think in terms of, you know, this word of intentionality is there's a respect of the balance. And if you want to get the best out of your employees, you're going to acknowledge that balance in terms of the integration of these different parts of our lives.
I think we're going to see greater flexibility, certainly with respect to traditional office workers, whether it's the flexibility on where work is being done. We may see more flexibility about when. You've been probably monitoring the 4-day work week. It's a thing. It's not going away. And I think it's all part of this recognition that, you know, we work, but we have other lives. So I think not being afraid of flexibility and being open to change is going to make an employer a more desirable employer, and you know, you're going to get the best out of your workers.
Absolutely. Julie and Felice, thank you guys so much for coming today. And also thank you for those of you, you'll see it in below, is they have a great free gift, which is a download of the 7 C's of Leadership Guide. Download that. Again, follow them. What a wealth of knowledge. And thank you again so much for coming and participating and helping us be the leaders. And I'm so excited about this. I have a few clients myself that it's, especially the policies and procedures where they're, what do these need to really look like? So go out and get that guide. I'll be sending that book to a few of my clients just to make sure they, they have a good resource guide as well. But again, thank you guys so much for coming. Thank you for participating. And just a thank you to taking the time and the space to put this together and be thoughtful and intentional about it, which is exactly what I feel that you guys have done. So thank you for giving that gift to us as well, writing this book. We appreciate it very much.
That's very kind.
Thank you.
It was great to meet you and talk with you.
You too. You too. Thank you guys.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.